This is the 2-bar slate wagon, which you'll be making in the kit. Comes with a 3-link coupling, and all parts are shown. Comes with a binny wheel assembly with stainless steel brass or steel axles, running in 4-ball races. It's a fairly straightforward kit to make. You need obviously PVA glue and some super glue. Thank you. The kit is supplied with a 4-slate load that will fit inside to the wagon, as I will show. 1, 2, 3, 4, and those can either be glued in, double-sided taped in, glue tack or plasticine to stop them rattling around. That then gives you a nice load to transport, and this comes with the slate wagon. It also gives it that little bit of weight that's needed. Thank you. This is construction of the 2-bar slate wagon, and we start off by building up the bearing assemblies. So if you'd like to find these particular parts, 4 bearings, 4 what look like the old-fashioned clock face, which are in 2mm, and 4 which are in 4mm. And you'll notice they have a clean side and what I call a dirty side. So we start off by putting the bearing into the clean side. So if you do that on 4 off of the 2mm thickness ones, and you'll find there's a slight protrusion of the bearing through the other side. That's correct. So I'll do this with all 4. Again, push through from the clean side. And then on the thicker ones, again you have a clean side and a dirty side. This time dirty side up, and we load this half onto it and push tight, and the bearing will engage and pull the two together. And then if you put it down to the surface and just push down each side, and do that with the next one, again got a clean side and a dirty side. So we go bearing onto there and push, and then line them up, just push down. What I'm now going to do is to actually glue the bearing onto the holder, and this is done with super glue, and we just run it around the edge, which I'll do. By capillary action, that will soak in. Just on the bottom is all that's needed. You do that on all 4. Try not to stick your finger to it. It's important that we only actually glue the bearing to the top piece. We don't glue the 2 pieces of wood together yet. That comes later on. Right, put those to one side to dry, and we'll move on to the next section. Right, the next section then is to start to build up the chassis. If you take these 2 parts, and you'll see that there's a cutout down one side there, and not the other side. And the same with this one, we have some lines engraved on one side and a cutout there. Now this part, and of course we have this part, lots of little holes, 2mm holes in it, and make sure that all those holes are holes and there's not a little piece left in there for the engraving. Just sort of make sure if there is anything left in there, then it just needs to be pushed out using one of the little posts supplied. So next job we have to do is to glue these 2 parts together, and this is done with that engraved, or sorry, that cut part there has to line up as it does there, and we can see the engraving. And obviously it's possible to put this together the wrong way, like that, and you don't see any engraving. That's wrong. That's the correct way. So when it's glued, Just tamp it down on all four edges, then we wipe away the excess glue. So we do this with a wood PVA glue, which I'll go ahead and do now. Don't want too much, just around the edges, and try and miss out the holes, because we don't want the glue going into the holes yet. You don't really want anywhere I've put some there, and then just sort of spread it around a bit with your finger. And then offer it on top. Fingers each side, just to line it all up and squeeze it together. And down onto a flat surface and squeeze. And make sure that the notch there lines up with each other on the ends. Then wipe off any excess glue. And squeezing together at the same time. And you get a nice flush surface all the way around. So we leave that for a couple of minutes to dry, and then we'll move on to the next section. Right, next section is to find the four pieces, which are 3mm thick. And these have to be glued together, one on top of the other, to make up two pieces which are 6mm wide. Again, make sure all the holes are punched through. Again, we've got one there, just a little push, and it'll drop out the insert where the lasers cut it. Again, go around them all. Quick check that they're all clear, all the holes are clear, yep. And now again we have a clean side and a dirty side. So we put the dirty side and the dirty side together, put that to one side. And again here, clean and dirty, and we fix the dirties together. What we're doing is going around with some glue, drop top one on, and that's same as before. We go around each side pushing it down. And again we do this with a PVA glue, and again we don't want to get it into the holes, so just a small amount. All the way around. Again, just spread around with the fingers. And then dirty side to dirty side. Squeeze it together. And then down onto your flat surface and wipe off the excess, both on the inside and on the outside. And put that one to one side. You should be able to look through and see that you can see through all the holes. Then we'll do the next one. Again, check you can see through all the holes. If for any reason you've got a bit of glue in one of the holes, now's the time to take one of the little sticks and just run it through the hole to remove any excess glue that may be in the hole. So then put that one to one side, wait for those to dry before we move on to the next section. Right, the next part then is to take one of the parts you joined together, which is the 6mm thick ones, and then you take the 1mm, which we call the topping, and we have to glue this part onto the top, and then we just clamp it down all the way around and then remove the excess glue as we go. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that, I'll show you what to do. We use the normal PVA glue. Again, we don't want to make sure we get any in the holes. So just go around the outside. As I'm doing here. And then just with your finger, just spread it around a little bit again, making sure it's not in the holes. There we go. Doesn't matter which side you do this on, because both sides are the same. But when you glue this one on, make sure you do it so you can actually see the engraving. Place the two together, squeeze it all the way around, and then pushing it down onto a flat surface while squeezing together. Again, making sure there's no glue showing through. Do this all the way around. And put that aside to dry before we move on to the next section. Right, so our next section we're going to put together is take the chassis, which you've already glued together. You're now going to glue the floor onto it, and again it's a nice fit all the way around. But to make sure it's a good fit and the holes line up, you need to find the 12 little sticks. These in this case are a Day-Glo orange. There may be different colours in your pack, depends what I have available at the time. Colour doesn't matter because they get covered up. So we'll do a dummy run first of all. We'll be laying some glue around the outside and down the middle, dropping it on, obviously this side, not that side. So we drop it onto the glue, and then we take our 12 pins and we drop them in. As you can see what I'm doing now. There's no need to put all 12 in. 4 at each end is more than adequate. At that point you can then push down onto the glue, pick it up, make sure everything is lined up. You can take the 4 pins out from each end, squeeze down all the way and remove any excess glue. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we start off by adding a few bits of glue or dollops of glue around the edge. Again, nothing too much needed. And some down the middle. Again, spread it around a little bit. It stops it oozing through. You take your top, drop him on, line him up with your finger and thumb roughly to start with. And then drop in the 4 or 8 for each end. Work fairly quickly. And then push down all the way around. Then you take your 4 sticks out from each end and gently push down on the sides, and again wiping away any excess while squeezing tight together. That completes that section, so you can put that to one side now and wait for that to dry. Right, next section we're going to start to build up are the sides, or the rods that support the actual bars or planks. So if you lay out your piece that we glued together earlier on, and 4 1mm thick, so that's the very thin ones, spacers, 2, 2, 4 and 4 rods and 2 each end. Now some of these 1mm ones still have the little insert where the laser doesn't cut it all the way through, so just give it a little push to knock out the center. So if you go ahead and do that on all the ones that haven't come through, some have, some haven't, makes it a bit easier to start with if you've already got the holes there. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And when you come back, I'll have been ready with all my holes. Okay, right, so I've done that now. So now we have to start gluing these in position. So you take a small rod, it doesn't matter which way around the rod is. You put just a little bit of white PVA glue on the end, just a small amount as I've done there. You load that into one of the holes, and then you take one of the little 1mm ones, you drop it on top and push it down, and then you move on to the next one. You do exactly the same, small amount of PVA glue on the end, down into the hole, and you add a little 1mm one, and you do that going around them all, which I'll do. And if you'd like to do the same when you come back, I'd have gone round with them all. Okay, so I've done all mine now. So we've done 1 rod and a 1mm spacer put down on top of each one. We then have to find the 2mm width ones, which I can show you there. There are also some 3mm ones as well, as you can see the difference. So the next things we have to line up are the 2mm ones. Again, you need the hole in the middle, and some of them again don't have the holes punched through. It's not really a problem because they will just slide on top, as I've done there. So just go around and slide a 2mm one on top of the 1mm ones you've already done. No need to glue these, just drop them down on. It's a bit fiddly. Let's just go around and do them all, which I'll go ahead and do. When you come back, you'd have done the same. Right, I've now put my 2mm ones on top of the one. We now have to add a 1mm one now onto each of them. So what we're building up is, if you look from the side, it will end up looking like a cotton reel. So again, just drop the 1mm on top. Make sure again that all the holes have been punched out. If they haven't, when you slide it on, it will push them out themselves anyway. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that. And when you come back, I'd have also done the same as well. Right, you now come back, and I've now done a build up, which is a 1, a 2 and a 1, as you can see from the side there. In that case, that one there I've cocked up and put an extra 2 on, so I'll just take him off. There we go. So they're all the same height all the way around. We then take one of the parts which we glued together, and we have to lower this now over the pins. It's fairly straightforward to do. Just line them up as you go. A bit fiddly, but start one end. You can see you've got a slight angle. And then just work your way down. each side at a time. Pins are quite flexible, so they will bend. Come to the ends, and down we go. So just give it a push down and just check that you don't have any gaps, which means you've put the correct 1mm, 2mm, 1mm in. And then we do exactly the same now, where we build up again. So we add our 1mm all the way round again, so that's 1mm added to each one, as I'm doing here, as you can see. So we do that on the others. So if you do that, come back, and then we'll move to the next bit. Right, so I've now added my 1mm all the way round. So we then take the 3mm now width ones, and we slide the 3mm over the pins, as I'm doing here. So again, go and do that all the way round. Right, I've added my now 3mm all the way round. So we now have to top that off with some more 1mm. So again, slide a 1mm onto the top of each one, as I'm doing there. So you can see that's making up another cotton reel, but a bit deeper cotton reel than ones on the lower side. So if you'd like to carry on and put the ones on top of those. Right, so the next section now is we've built up our top cotton reels, which is a 1, a 3 and a 1. We then take the part we made before, which had the topping done on it, and we have to glue that down onto there so that all the pins slide up in. So to do that, we take a little bit of PVA glue, just a small amount, and we put a little dollop on the top of each pin. Hardly any, just enough to locate it. There we go. And then turn them over, line them up, and you'll find that it will in fact just drop down on. And then remove any excess glue. This squeezing out, shouldn't be too much there. And keep some downward pressure on it. Remove any glue that's showing on the insides. And we put that to one side to thoroughly dry. So that's the top basket assembly done. And now we will move on to the next section. Right, so the next section is to put the bands on the ends. Find some 3D printed bands. They will only go on one way because the actual square that they slip over is not square, it's slightly oblong. So you'll find that in one direction they will go, which that one is going. If you turn it through 90, you'll find it's just too tight. So if it's too tight, rotate it through 90 degrees and you'll find it slips over quite smoothly. So do that on them all. We've got two on. If you just push down hard onto a flat surface, that will line them up. And do the same on the other end. Again, if it doesn't want to go, chances are it's 90 degrees out. Again, push down firmly. And then maybe some little bits of stringing from the 3D printing that can be quite easily just pulled away with your fingers. And then you take a very small amount of super glue and just run it along the bottom, and that will locate the bands in position. And that will do a capillary action, will soak down in and hold them in position. So having done that, we can put that to one position, well, to one side, and move on to the next section. The next section, locate the 4 bearings assemblies, which you'd already previously put together, the 4 outer covers, as you can see there, and the small jig for assembling them. So what we're going to do is, if we take just one first of all, so you can see what we're going to do, we turn them over. We're going to be applying a small amount of glue, which I will show you where I can find my part for putting the glue on with. I'm having trouble locating things at the moment, so I use this for the moment. So you're going to put a little bit of PVA glue on there and there, so that's the surface that you can't see the bearing as such. And then we will drop this onto it and push down onto the glue, and then take that as an assembly, load it into the jig as I've done there, and then you push down and the other side pushing down, and then you look to make sure you've got the same amount of distance all the way round, and you push down and squeeze, and then using a small screwdriver, Allen key knife, you'll be able to scrape away any excess glue that is shown along that side there. And then when that's dry, after about 10-20 seconds, you pop him out as one piece, and then you'll go around and just clean some of the glue off from those 2 edges there. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can watch me do it, and then you'll know what to do. Right, so we start off then with a little bit of super glue, not super glue, white PVA glue, and we put a little bit on the bearing assembly. We drop our cover on, gentle bit of pressure, then load it into the jig, push them both firmly down into the jig, and then make sure that you've got the same showing each side. There's a little bit of movement, you can move it, and then when you're happy, push down and push the 2 together. As you can see, we have some glue being shown squeezing out. Using a small screwdriver, just remove that glue, because we need a clean surface here for later on when we're gluing it to the chassis. And then gently remove it from the jig. Again, using a screwdriver or a sharp knife, just remove the excess glue showing on the outside, and we can then put that one to one side and do the other 3 exactly the same. Right, I've done my 4 and put those to one side. I will be using the jig again to do a little bit more work in a moment. So first make sure that you clean all the loose glue off of the jig, otherwise that will upset it when we come to use it later on. Right, so while they're put away to dry, we'll move on to the next section. Well, while we're waiting for that to dry, the next section to do is to actually fit the couplings. So again, find your basic unit that you built earlier on. 2 bent 1.5mm steel hooks, 2 2mm with slots in there, and 2 1mm little arrows on. And the way these go together is we'll do one end first of all, so that's 1 hook, 1 2mm piece and 1 1mm piece. And you'll find that the hook drops into a hole quite nicely there. Then you take, we'll do a dry run first of all, the one with the slot in it, and the slot pushes up against the back of the hook and should be in line on the side. And then we finally glue the one with the little one with the arrow on top, which holds it in location. And we use PVA and super glue for both these operations. So let's go through with the first one. So we put our hook in as we've done, and then a small amount of PVA glue just either side of the hook. So I've done there. And then the one with the slot, drop down on top and line it up with the back and with the front, and remove any excess glue, and just check that the hook is sticking out at 90 degrees and that it's flush with the top of the groove, so you can't feel it when you rub your finger over. We then take a little bit of super glue, the runny stuff, and we just do a little drop down into where the hook is, and that'll soak down through. And then with a little bit of tissue, just wipe excess off. And then we take our white PVA glue again, and we just put a little bit either side. And we take our cap, a little arrow on it, and we drop that down on. Line it up all the way around, squeeze it down. And then we remove our excess glue. So we take our excess glue from the sides and from the ends. And that's our hook is in position, and looking down on top is sticking out about 90 degrees. So we'll now do that with the other side. So I'll go ahead and do that. When you come back, I'd have finished that end as well. Right, so I've done my hooks both ends now. Now while we're actually on the subject of hooks, supplied with the kit is two types of chain. I'll just try and find the parts of chain. There we go. Supplied with a 3-link and just a single link on its own. Now when you connect up, I'll show you this with one that I've already made earlier on. In this case we'll show you with a 3-bar one. If you connect using the 3-link, as you can see there's quite a big gap between the two wagons, which can be a bit of a problem when you're stopping and starting, as they tend to bump into each other. But that's an option you have. The other option I supply with the kit is 1 link. Now if you just fit 1 link, as I've done there, between the two, you'll find that this is a little bit more acceptable. There's a slight gap between, and it does allow you to still have a turn without them actually coupling up with each other. So that's your options you have. So having covered those, we will now move on to the next section. So I'll put the couplings to one side and move on to the next section, which is the undercarriage. But before we do the undercarriage, we have to glue the wheel sections together. So first thing to do is to separate them using a small knife blade, which I'm having problems locating again as usual. Okay, there we go. So where we put them together, just separate them with a knife blade. And we're going to glue these sections together. So we take the one that doesn't have the bearing in it, we put a very small amount of PVA glue on that surface there, and we take a bearing and we drop it back on again, push them together, then just drop it into the jig to make sure everything lines up. Give it a squeeze. Remove any excess glue off the top. And remove any excess glue that is showing on the sides there. And repeat that for the other three. Right, I've done that on mine. Now is a fairly good time to actually put some oil into the bearings. As you can see, there's a slight gap where you can access the balls. Just a little touch of oil down into the slot. Not too much. I tend to use a 3-in-1 oil. It's a good general purpose oil. And with the tissue, just remove any excess on the surface. Then we can move on to the next section. Right, next part is to find the 4 axle covers. Tiny, oops, I think you can see it, circle with a circle engraved in it. There's 4 of those, and those get located onto the actual axle box there. Covers the hole up. And the way to do that is to take some white PVA glue, a very, very small amount, and then we'll take 1 axle box, which hopefully you can see, yes, and we put a very small amount, then using a knife blade, pick up one of the covers, and then just drop it down onto the glue. Just move it around a bit until you can't see any of the lines underneath. And then with the knife blade, just remove some excess glue. Make sure it still lines up. And when you're happy, move on to the next one. So if you'd like to do that with the other 3, and then we'll move on to the next section. Right, while we're waiting for those to dry, we can move on to the next section, which is fitting the corner banding onto each corner of the top assembly. Now these are 3D printed, and the inside is clean. It must be a clean surface. You can just rub your finger over it. If there's a lump, just rub your nail over it and then knock it off. And if you'd like to do that on all 8 of them, there we go, there's a little bit there. And your nail will just remove it. So we go around and do all of those. There's another one, just remove it a little bit. That's the surface that we're going to super glue. Maybe a few like hairs attached to it, they'll just pull off quite easily. So we go around and do all of those. You don't have to fit these, but it does make it a little bit more authentic. You can also perhaps fit these after you've done any painting. Right, so let's deal with 1 first of all. So we take 1 and we'll do it on the lower one. So it goes onto the corner, as you can see. Don't worry about lining up both sides at the same time. This is located using some super glue. So get it about halfway on the corner there. So we've got a bit of a gap. And you take some super glue and just touch it underneath, and then slide it down until it's in the middle, and then just push down with your finger. Hold that for a few seconds. We can move to the other side. And you may have to tweak it a little bit to line it up. Bit of super glue underneath, and then line it up with your finger and thumb and just push down. In my case, I stuck my finger to it slightly. And any glue that's showing, just gently scrape off. And then we move on to the next corner. And you do that on all the 4 lower corners and all the 4 upper corners. So I'll go ahead and do that. And when you come back, we'd have finished that part. Right, so I've done all my 4 corners. It may be a little bit beneficial to add, I've lost my knife blade now. Right, so I can't show you that. Beneficial to add a small amount of super glue just into the corner underneath. So just take a little bit of super glue and just touch it on the corner of each one. That'll just make sure that bands do stay in place. It will wick up into the corner between the bands and the actual piece of wood. Right, so we can leave that to dry, and then we'll move on to the next section, which is fitting the wheels. Before we fit the wheels, we have to fit the braking assembly. You'll see that on one side there's a little notch cut out there, but not on that side. You need to locate the brake assembly, which is engraved on one side but not on the other. So you want the engraving to show out, and it engages in the notches as I've shown there. So again, it will just slot down into position nicely. And then using a very small amount of super glue, we add just a little bit of super glue to the back. You can see where I'm putting it. Make sure it's firmly pushed down. And then a tiny amount of super glue just on the front face, where it touches the chassis. Again, make sure it's pushed in firmly and pushed down. And when you look from the end, you should see that it's at 90 degrees. If it's not, then just push a little bit in the bottom until it's shown as to be 90 degrees. And it will be in the correct position that way because of the way the slots are. So we then need that to dry. And then we move on to doing the next section. Right, next we have to fit the outer part of the braking assembly, which the handle fits to. So you need to find this part, make sure that the hole is clear, using the small short length of rod. Now this locates into the groove that we had earlier on, and there's going to be a nice fit up into the groove. So again, we fit that with some PVA glue, just a small amount, and we load that on into the groove and push firmly. And to make sure everything's aligned properly, we take the small length of rod, and it should go between the 2 holes. and should all line up, which it does. So we can take the rod out, not needed at the moment. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the next job now is to actually fit the wheels. I'll take an axle box, show you how it goes. See the lines we have there? That's how the axle box lines up on the lines. So that's one that side. And as you can see, the other one goes on the other side. But we have to do that with the wheels actually fitted between the axle boxes. So we grab a set of wheels. We'll do a dummy run first of all. Locate them in. And we locate them in the other side. Hold it between your two fingers. And then you lower it down onto the chassis. And using your other two fingers, you line up the line with the axle box, and you line this one up with the axle box while squeezing in. There should be a little bit of play in the wheels, and they should rotate quite nicely. And then one finger on each axle box and push down firmly to make sure it's glued in while squeezing from each side. So we'll go ahead and do that now for real. It's up to you how you put the glue on, whether you put it on the axle boxes or on the chassis itself. What we'll do is we'll put it on the axle box itself first. So you want a small amount on the flat surface and a small amount on the side surface. And then, as we did on the dry run, line it up, drop it down onto the marks, and then maneuver it each side, do one side at a time until it lines up with the engraved marks, and squeeze, and then do the same with the other side. Squeeze in from the side and push down at the same time. And check that you've got a little bit of movement on the wheel. If you haven't, you can just gently tease them out from each side until you've got a bit of play, which will allow the wheels to rotate. And again, keep pressure top and bottom. Then you need to remove any excess glue, just showing on the sides. And we check the other side. And maybe some up in the curve there. Maybe best to do this with a knife blade. It's up to you. As I said before, this glue does dry clear. Right, now we've got a bit of movement, so we can now do the same on the other side. Again, we'll do a dummy run. Take the axle, throw it around a bit, load it onto the wheel, load it onto the other wheel. Again, we do a dummy run, line it up both sides, push down and squeeze in, make sure we've got a bit of movement on the wheels, which we have. So again, we'll do this one for real. So we'll take our glue, but this time what we'll do is we'll do something a bit different. We'll actually put it on the chassis first. So squeeze out a dollop, and then we'll spread some along the top where it's going to glue to, and we'll put some on the side, and some on the other side, and we'll offer him up. So drop him down on, do one side first, line up with the engraved marks, and squeeze, and do the same with the other side. Squeeze in and then push down firmly on the axle boxes while squeezing, and check you've got a bit of movement there and the wheels rotate nicely. Hold that for a few seconds, make sure the glue goes off. Then, as before, go around either with a knife blade or a sharp screwdriver just to remove the excess. If it's to both sides. And put that aside to dry. Right, now we're going to fit the handle, brake handle. So take your short piece of plastic rod, load it in to the holes so they line up, then take 1mm with a small hole in it, place that on the outside, then take the brake. It doesn't matter which way round this goes at the moment, we're just going to glue in the rod and the spacer and then we'll worry about the handle afterwards. So the handle goes over the end. You want to set it so that the rod doesn't quite protrude out the end of the handle, so it all lines up nicely. Then you take your super glue and you put a bit on the inside, making sure that everything stays on the outside, and then put a little bit on the 1mm washer and the chassis, and a little bit on the rod, and just for some measure just add a little bit of super glue to the inside where the rod protrudes. You can then remove the braking arm, turn it onto its side, and we now have to locate the braking arm. And this will drop on, as I've shown there, and we then have to glue it into a position. Now this one's quite a delicate one. As you can see, there's a gap that runs all the way down. So the position really to glue this one in is approximately where I have it now, but perhaps before you glue that in, you actually, if you're going to do any painting, is to actually paint up the axle box. This one's best held in with super glue. So put some super glue over the end where the rod protrudes, and then load it on, pushing down and manoeuvring it into its right position. And then a quick view underneath to make sure it's in line with the rest of the wagon itself. And that completes the 2-bar slate wagon. Well, the slate packs come in 4s. There's obviously the base where they're poured from. You can clean that up if you want to with some sandpaper, but it's not really necessary, it's not a seam. And then they load in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a bit of movement, bit of a gap between them. Now you can either put them in with a bit of plasticine or blue tack on the bottom, or you can put them in with some double-sided tape, or you can glue them in permanently with some araldite. Obviously best to do after it's been painted. And this then gives it quite a nice weight. So there we go. So that's it with the slate packs fitted. Hope you've enjoyed building it, and I hope you have some good fun running it on your railway. Thank you.